Early humans. The objectives are 1. Describe the spread of Homo sapiens throughout the world by 10,000 BCE, and then 2nd, explain how Paleolithic peoples use technology to enhance their lives. Now, to discuss what history is first, historians largely rely on documents or written records to create the picture of the past. Historians study documents, written words. And so technically, history is that age in which there are written word and written documents that historians can study. Now, historians and researchers have called that phase before the written word prehistory. And during this period, there was no writing, and so there's no real written evidence to study to understand these people. And so studying these people and how they lived and who they were is connected to other disciplines to be able to analyze this sort of thing. And so you would have archaeological evidence, you would have biological analysis, anthropological information in general. These would be the fields in which one would practice and study and use to understand these pre-humans, these early human people. Now, just to speak a little bit about those kind of fields of study. First, you have archaeology. Now, archaeology is the study of past societies through an analysis of what they've left behind. And that is that they unearth various materials known as artifacts, that is, tools, pottery, painting, weapons, buildings, really anything that's left behind that has a kind of tangible or physical quality. And these objects would be analyzed and contextualized to give a better picture of who these people are. Now, the step beyond that then is in the field of anthropology, and they would study these kind of remains and give a picture of what these people were like. Anthropology is the study of human life and cultures through the use of artifacts and human remains. So the things that are left behind can really illuminate an image of who these people were. And so archaeology and anthropology together are able to give us kind of a clearer idea of what these people lived like. And so the goal then is the reconstruction of life and society through these studies, because there's no written word to kind of study them. Now, in terms of dating, which is a problem when we talk about archaeological digs, how do you know how old that thing is that you're pulling up out of the earth? And so that's really the most difficult aspect, particularly of artifacts that are coming out of the ground. Now, the easiest and more common thing that everyone is aware of is radiocarbon dating. That is, a radioactive carbon is within all living things, and it's really consumed through breathing and eating. And it gets into the body on a consistent level. And of course, so you're taking in this carbon through living features, living processes. But of course, when you die, you're not eating or breathing, and so you're not taking in any more of that radiocarbon. And so scientists then study the decay rate of that radiocarbon, are able to articulate how old that thing was when it died, when it stopped taking in radiocarbon. Now, scientists argue that it's somewhere around 50,000 years that the limit is, and so it could be trusted for any date that far out. Now, that's questionable, and many historians and archaeologists debate over whether this is reliable and whether it's reliable at that distance, but nevertheless is the most common method. Another method is thermoluminescence dating, which has a limit of 200,000. It's a little more abstract, pertaining to electrons in the item itself. But the more common feature of dating is through radiocarbon dating. But there are other aspects to study the object or the thing that is coming out of the soil, maybe biological remains of some sort. And that's really what we're after, the biological analysis of organic remains. That could be anything, blood, hair, whatever it might be, any kind of biological organic remains that allows for the analysis of these living people or things. And this DNA really survives for millions of years, so it's argued. And so from this, you can reconstruct ancient DNA, know more about these people. For example, then the woolly mammoth. We're able to extract DNA of the mammoth. And beyond the fact that it's possible to clone it, you can illuminate a lot about these ancient people and creatures through their DNA structure. Now, the early stages of human evolution are murky at best. But what is argued is that there gradually was a transition from early primates to hominids in general, and then to a more modern looking man called Homo sapien, and eventually Homo sapiens sapien, which is who we are right now. So the earliest human-like creatures lived in Africa somewhere around 3 to 4 million years ago, it's argued. Now, the first transition out of a primitive primate was the Australopithecine. And the Australopithecine literally means southern ape, was discovered by Donald Johnson and was argued to be the first hominid. That is, humans and other creatures that walk upright. That's what a hominid is. Now you can see here, this is the kind of remains of two different Australopithecines. So the remains and the evidence, therefore, are pretty scant at best. But nevertheless, experts in anthropology, and particularly forensic anthropology, studying bones and human bones and primate bones, argue that these creatures walked upright. Now, somewhere around 1.5 million years ago, you see a descendant of the Australopithecine, the Homo erectus, which is an upright human being, emerge out of Africa with larger and more varied tools that have been chiseled and formed, and the first really to leave Africa into Europe and Asia, particularly capable of doing so because they had the ability to manipulate fire, which would be required to leave the warmth of Africa into colder climates. Now, two groups that emerged from Homo erectus are Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. And so these two distinct groups will largely be in competition with one another. Now, first, about Neanderthals. Neanderthals used stone tools in a complex way. They made their own clothes, so they're not rolling around naked. They actually have some kind of ideal of clothing themselves. They buried their dead, which is a very interesting feature, because obviously animals don't bury their dead. They don't have funerals. So here there's some indication perhaps that they had some religious belief in the afterlife, particularly when we see Neanderthals burying their dead with particular items that they had. So those are some indications of some spiritual belief. But somewhere around 150,000 years ago, we see the emergence of modern man, that is Homo sapiens sapien. But this, of course, comes through competition. It's not until 30,000 BCE that we see Homo sapiens sapien really replace Neanderthal. Now, how this is done is really unclear. Various anthropologists and archaeologists have argued different features. Perhaps they, through competition, Homo sapiens sapien dominated the resources available and therefore led to the decline of the Neanderthals. Or some have argued that they led into direct conflict through warfare. Or some even just argue that they integrated and intermarried. I mean, they were close enough genetically to propagate between themselves, but it's unclear what happened to those people. But what we know in general is that Homo sapiens sapien and early peoples really followed their hunting grounds and followed their migratory animals that they hunted, and really only shifted territories about 2 to 3 miles per generation as they spread through the globe, which is a snail's pace if you can think about it. But they're not really trying to get anywhere, it seems. But it seems that they're actually trying to follow and move to new regions with better resources, because of course you can exhaust the resources of a particular region, and so then best to move on. So it's argued then that it took a long time for the early man to spread out throughout the world. Now, these hunter-gatherers of the age really have various distinguishing features. Now, the distinguishing feature, of course, is the tool making. Now, during this age, which is known as Paleolithic Age, that is Old Stone Age, Paleo meaning old, lithic stone, the Old Stone Age, was somewhere between 2.5 million years ago to 10,000 BCE. And this is really characterized by primitive stonework where you're chipping away at rocks to form arrowheads or different sharp tools, spearheads. And this is kind of the typical caveman sort of image that people have. So the Paleolithic way of life was really centered around subsistence, of surviving. You have a hand-to-mouth society, and so humans really relied on two features, hunting and gathering. This was really the method by which one could develop and gain the resources needed to survive. Now, gathering seemed to be the number one means by which people maintained and gained calories. Wild grains, berries, fruit, nuts, plants in general, those were the main kind of items that people consumed. However, everyone wants a big cut of meat. And so hunting had a huge role. Hunting buffalo, horse, bison, reindeer. These beasts were very large at the time. Now, of course, the hunting of these animals was aided by various new inventions, particularly the invention of the spear and the arrow, which was kind of just a natural development to aid the hunting process. If you could think about it, the spear is kind of a natural step in which someone wants to extend the reach of the arm to kill a quite ferocious beast. And so that seems to be the ideal. But in general, these people were nomads. They were people who moved from place to place. They had no ability really to settle down permanently because they're searching for food. And so they're at the mercy of whatever resources happen to be there at the time. Now, what did gender roles look like? What did the roles of men and women look like? Now, well, this is largely going to be dictated by nature itself. Because, of course, women bore and raised the children by nature, according to nature. This wasn't some kind of patriarchal decision to oppress women. Women really are the only ones that could bear children, genetically, biologically, and they're the only ones that can feed children. Um, so it was required then for women to raise children naturally, which of course naturally led to the fact that they probably should stay near the camp. Why was this the case? Because there might be some kind of issue with the child. And it was also safer near the camp and near the fire. So this led to the demand for women to really have interruptible labor. You don't want um, Jane Doe to go on the hunt with the boys and bringing the child along, and they're about to make the kill, and the baby cries. So obviously, then women tended to practice the gathering, which, interestingly enough, because it was probably the number one mode by which calories were achieved, became a very, very important role. And so it was a natural kind of relationship between men and women because men would then go on the hunt. And so it was a cooperative sort of ideal, not a patriarchal oppression. It wasn't a male dominated world. It was actually quite egalitarian in concept. Now, of course, these people were essentially adapting and controlling the environment around them gradually over time. Now, of course, in colder climates, particularly as we hit the Ice Age, people begin to live in caves. Why? Because it seems to be a safer and more protective place from the elements. Now, we see as early as Homo erectus that through the ability of manipulating fire, people lived in caves and cooked meat. We know this because archaeologists have found associated with Homo erectus remains ashes from a fire, charred bones, which might indicate that the animal was cooked. But the concept of fire in general had some important ideals. Fire gave warmth and undoubtedly fostered a sense of community. Obviously, we still do this. We sit around a campfire when we go camping and we talk, right? And so it's fostered a sense of community, an element of protection. Most animals are afraid of fire, so you'd put the fire at the mouth of the cave. Cooked food. Who wants to eat raw meat when you can have a juicy steak? You know, so this is an important development, important shift, and of course, these fires were usually controlled and made by rubbing two pieces of wood together, and that seemed to be the method by which they controlled that. You also see the emergence of art itself. I mean, these hunter-gatherers in the Paleolithic Age are not just mindless kind of creatures. These hunters and gatherers living in caves had a unique, interesting perspective over the world, and they chose to express this through a painting on cave walls. I mean, some of the most famous paintings are in France, if you ever get a chance to take a look at them. But what they did was they went into the bowels of the cave, deeper into the cave, and they mixed animal fats with colors, probably achieved through flowers and things like that. And so they formed these sort of different pigments, and they painted in the dark, lit with stone lamps. A stone lamp was just essentially a carved out kind of rock that you would have wax with a flame, kind of like the image depicted here on the screen. And so then we would paint these beautiful scenes. I mean, you can see here some kind of buffalo, but probably the most famous is this cow in movement. You could see he's in movement, which is a complicated feature actually, quite advanced. This is not some primitive faulty, terrible artistic attempt. It's just not, your kid or your little kid sister, brother, drawing some ridiculous childish painting or picture. But you can see the stride and the movement of the legs. You can see a real attempt at capturing this animal's essence and who it is, and which really gives us an interesting glimpse into the heart and mind and soul of these early humans and what they valued. I mean, many of the depictions show gods and goddesses. It depicts hunting scenes. Even tells stories of fallen members of their community in some kind of animal attack. Now, again, just to remind you, the objectives are: 1. Describe the spread of Homo sapiens throughout the world by 10,000 BCE, and then 2nd, explain how Paleolithic peoples use technology to enhance their lives.